and welcome to the brand new Wicked Grumpy Queer podcast. I am one of your hosts, Rae McEwen.
And this is Kendall McEwen.
And we're going to discuss what on earth is going on in Chico. What are your thoughts?
Well, we have a lot of things going on.
Well, let's start with Nicole Nava's interesting speech at the school board meeting, saying that everyone who disagrees with her has a cold black heart. What do you think about that?
Well, the only cold black hearts that I can see are the people yelling at the other people on the other side of that.
Yeah, the other thing that I found interesting about that particular speech is she took it upon herself to lambast council member Addison Winslow for basically doing his job by speaking his piece and representing the people of District 4. Why that was at a school board meeting, I don't understand. What are your thoughts?
I think the only reason that she brought him up is because she's trying to, quote unquote, prove a point by saying that people like Addison Winslow are these extremists or social extremists. They want to brainwash the masses to be something. It reminds me very much of conspiracy theories that are drowning the internet these days.
Yeah, I think it's pretty myopic of them to believe that their interesting stances on things are like the correct stance. I think that they're really making any kind of public discourse on actual political issues kind of impossible, because like when you have a choice between ridiculousness, nonsense, and like actual sense, things are not actually getting discussed. What do you think about the intense sort of decorum that is being enforced at these city council meetings?
Well, I wasn't there, so I can't exactly vouch for anybody, but from what I gathered from just watching the video online, it didn't seem like anybody was really out of order. From the perspective of the viewer from the video, it was very quiet when someone was speaking, and everyone seemed to abide by the rules. I don't know what was going on in the audience, but while speaking, I did notice that there was clapping done with the fingers to the bottom of the palms next to the wrist to make just a lighter golf clap. So I think just because someone gets their feelings hurt in the audience, it doesn't need to be brought up in a political situation to actually change any rules.
I do agree, but I also, there was a pretty big disturbance in the audience at the council meeting this week. And I do think decorum has its place, and it is required by the Brown Act. But when I think it becomes a problem is when this idea of decorum is being used to silence a council member or put pressure on them not to speak. And in this case, that council member is Addison Winslow. And what do you think of the council's vote pretty much to silence Addison this week?
The problem, so the reason for a board is to have what's called a discussion where people speak their views on particular issues. So when you have something that's extremely one-sided, and in this case, the Chico City Council's going towards a completely one-sided by muting Addison Winslow, there is no discussion, there's no discourse. And with that, you have a very one-sided vote on these policies, which nobody wants in a democracy.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting, too, because while I understand that there was a rule that was not being followed, I find it interesting that Sean Morgan decided to bring it up in the way that he did instead of referencing it as a mistake that was made and that needed to be rectified. He brought it up as something that needed to be changed at the meeting, when really what he was proposing was not so much a change, but adherence to the original rule. And while I understand that rules are important, the de facto effect of this decision is the silencing of Addison Winslow. Because as a minority on the city council, the only way that he could get something on the agenda so that the public can comment about it is by submitting these written requests. And also because he has really great new ideas, these written requests allow him the opportunity to really communicate with the other council members the context for his ideas. So without that, he's pretty much just afloat without anything. Like, what do you think?
I was wondering if I'd like to make a comment on the whole obscurity. It's so hard to get this information on their website to watch these videos. Just to find a video on a meeting is extremely convoluted. I'm fairly internet literate, computer literate, and I've been using computers for a long time. And it was really hard for me to find these discussions. And so how is it that the general public can easily find these topics that are being discussed and voted on that are going to affect their lives? But what would be good is if it could be easily accessed. And what I mean, it can be argued that, yeah, it's easily accessed because it is available. But for example, there's no live streaming YouTube. Everyone uses YouTube.
I do think you can watch the video live on the city council website. But there is something to be said for the fact that these meetings are not being uploaded to YouTube by the city council when most younger people are going to look for these meetings on YouTube. There is a new YouTube channel that has been uploading these Chico City Council meetings to YouTube, and I'm hoping that that continues to grow to make these meetings more accessible to the general public. What do you think about the large number of speakers who are speaking against Valley's Edge? I think it's something like 22 to 3 of the opposition, and yet the council is continuing to move forward with this development.
It doesn't make any sense, and that just exposes like there's something wrong here. The public input should be that. It should be public input, or even take the public input and use it for discussion. I noticed that one of the points, I don't know if I'm remembering correctly, but it was said that they didn't like Addison Winslow posting these agendas in written form, so that way it's on the website, because that way if it's on the website, people can read it and they'll have too many people coming in wasting time. But that's the whole point of these meetings, is for the public to understand what's happening and for them to come in and speak their piece. That way that there's public input. Wasting time doesn't make any sense. This is these people's jobs. This is what they do.
Yeah, I fully agree. This idea that Addison Winslow is somehow wasting time by representing his district and speaking his piece is disturbing at best. This idea that we are supposed to just like sit down and be quiet and let the quote unquote adults handle things is ridiculous and wrong, especially when we, as the younger generation, are the ones that are going to be inheriting their decisions. So ultimately, it affects us the most. So this idea that Addison, by speaking his concerns, is somehow wasting the council's time is ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree.
So with regards to transgender rights issues going on with the school board right now, Wednesday night was interesting. Some of our regular voices showed up to speak their piece on the issue again, essentially blasting the school board for following the law and also acknowledging the massive outpouring of public opinion on the matter of allowing trans kids to keep privacy. What do you think about their little temper tantrum that they decided to throw at the school board meeting?
It just shows that they're bitterly clinging to guns and religion.
The thing is, too, like, I have no problem with, reasonable gun use and religion. That is sort of the smokescreen that these people are hiding behind to cloak their nefarious plans, essentially. That some of these people, like, intentionally spread malicious lies in public forums and contribute to the massive amount of disinformation that is out there. That's part of why we started this podcast, is to try to call out some of those issues and also to add, our input. We're not experts, but we are Chico locals and we've lived here for a really long time. So I think that our input matters. I think that Addison's input matters. Honestly, I think every council member should be speaking their piece and representing their districts. The fact that Addison is the only one willing to make waves, I think, is a problem.
It's one thing to spew out facts and statistics that are supporting your argument when those facts and statistics are about that argument. I have noticed that there is these just completely out of context facts to prove a point that it's almost like when people misrepresent Bible verses. They'll cherry pick certain things to prove something, and it's completely out of context. If you read the verse before and the verse after, you'll get an idea or a picture of exactly what it's saying, which it sometimes is exactly the opposite of what people are trying to prove.
Yeah, and more than that, it's not even like the misrepresentation of information. It's straight up factual omissions, straight up lies, straight up this is what's happening when that is not what's happening. And one thing that I found interesting too about the recent school board meetings is this intense propping up, I guess you would say, of Abigail Schreier's book Irreversible Damage, which is not written by a scientist, spoiler alert, and is very, very biased and doesn't present good evidence, and ultimately creates more hate for trans people. This idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria is ridiculous and has been disproven multiple times in multiple studies. And so many people have brought that forward, this idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria, as the reason why parents must be informed of their kid being trans.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I'm not sure if this is the right place to bring it up, but I will. During the whole election fraud thing, people saw these videos of like the ballots that are being carried in with these like, push carts, and they were saying, "Look, here's thousands and thousands and thousands of all of a sudden fake." They call them fake, votes, which is completely false. That's just a normal. They're pushing around everyone's votes. So when people saw that, the ones that believed in the big lie, they said, look, we have evidence. Look. And everyone's excited and they keep referring to that video and keep pointing to it. This is exactly what's happening with the Abigail Schreier book. Look, we have evidence, and they're bringing in, segments of it and quoting it as if it's scientific fact, which it is not.
Yeah, and the thing that I find interesting is that the opposition continued to say in their addresses to the school board that they kept saying they were not transphobic, they're not homophobic, blah, blah, blah. But then why are you trying to prove that trans people don't exist or that it's somehow a disease that needs to be eradicated? Like, you can code it all you want. A savvy viewer is going to be able to figure out that you are, in fact, what you're saying you're not.
I think one of the arguments that the people against transgender rights have is that it's not biblical, it's not human nature, that it is like a burden on society, that it's like the satanic thing or evil, which is really interesting because if you've ever met someone that is transgender, they have this vibrancy to them. They're very nice people. They have undergone extreme amounts of trauma to get where they are, and they understand the value of life, and also they understand the value of their authenticity, which is really important, which a lot of people have lost or have never even found. They're falling into stereotypes. They're falling into like the crowd, kind of like wearing this mask and acting like what they think they should be like.
That idea of that sociological idea of performing gender. Speaking of sociology and gender, what did you think about Doug LaMalfa's speech on April 5th where he said there's only two genders?
I think he was trying to make it sound like that it's a scientific fact that you're only born a boy or a girl because there's, what do you say, there's only an XX and an XY or something like that. But it's long since been scientifically proven that that's not the case.
Essentially, he was saying that intersex people don't exist, and intersex, I believe, was recently added as an option for birth certificates instead of just boy or girl. So the federal and state government literally recognize the fact that intersex people exist But our congressman, who is supposed to be representing us, apparently doesn't understand that. And there's this idea that this is basic biology. It's like, yeah, honey, it's basic biology. Generally speaking, most people fall into these categories. However, there's a huge variation of other people who are not born with clear XX, XY chromosomes. And ultimately, unless your chromosomes have been tested, you don't even necessarily know if you're intersex or what your chromosomes are. So, and I'm not even a biologist. I just know this information because it's science. I haven't taken advanced biology, but I have taken, I guess you could say, basic intermediate biology. And I have learned this information, and it is not hard to find. We live in the age of information. So it's if you're going to make an argument, at least base it on fact.
If someone has a child that presents as transgender, wouldn't one want to do everything to try to understand why or why it is? And if you love that child and they love you as their parent, if there is any sort of maybe confusion or whatever, it's not even a big deal. What's going to happen? They'll figure out later on down the road who they truly are. If transgender is truly who they are, then you'll become understanding of it. So if you're going to do everything in your power to try to fight your own child who is trying to stand up for their rights, I think you would have to have a very cold, black heart.
It's funny that you brought that up. One of the things that Nicole Nava said in that particular speech was she cited something that a pediatrician at Mount Sinai said about most people who have breast binders then move on later to testosterone and surgery to affirm their gender. She said this as if it's some kind of contagion, which what I would suggest is, rather than breast binders being some sort of gateway drug to transgenderism, I would suggest that perhaps people who are willing to wear a breast binder are actually men. They're actually trans men. And so when they get to that stage of wearing a binder, which helps them feel more comfortable in their body and experience less gender dysphoria, it proves my point, that people who are seeking out this kind of gender affirming care in the form of a breast binder are people who are they know who they are. Their authenticity is there.
Yeah, we don't have parents wrapping their children's breasts.
Exactly. At least I hope not. So I think we got through everything that I can think of. Oh, one more thing. Chico first published a video on YouTube that was almost a direct ripoff of our video on a similar topic. And what do you think about that?
I think it's awesome because, but it just shows the inadequacy of their intellect.
Yeah,
it's poor quality. It was a crappy phone recording of a screen playing the video, and I tried watching it and I couldn't actually understand what the point was. It was something about Addison Winslow not doing the Pledge of Allegiance, but from what I gathered, because I couldn't hear it anyways because the audio quality was so bad, it looks like he stood up and put his arm over his chest and was speaking the Pledge of Allegiance. So I don't know what the hell their point was.
Yeah, that's another good question. This idea that somehow you have to recite the Pledge of Allegiance or you're not American enough. What do you think about that?
No, that could be a whole nother podcast.
I agree. Because that was the thing that they were trying to stand on, is that Addison Winslow didn't recite the Pledge of Allegiance. It's almost like these people are trying to refer back to the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s. Look at these evil humans.
When I was a kid, my dad told me stories of the Red Scare, which was America was really concerned with the communist parties and being in a war state. And so we were afraid that they had, these sleeper agents everywhere. People were going to come out of the blue and take over the government. And as a kid hearing that, I just thought that was crazy. That actually happened. That's nuts. And I thought that people just completely over dramatized and exaggerated that, and thought, how can you possibly believe that, and how crazy is that? And here, this is exactly what we have here, is this great fear that these transgender people are going to come in and, take away our babies and take away our government and make everybody something, make everyone socialist or something like that.
I think there's also a very polarized idea of what socialism is, but that could be a whole other podcast too. Like people not understanding what socialism is and that.
Right. Socialism is not communism. There's completely different things.
And the other thing about socialism is that there's different levels of socialism as well. There's Venezuela, but then there's like Canada and the UK. So like we already as a society have a mix of capitalism and socialism because like you don't have to directly pay the fire department as an individual if your house is on fire. That is socialism. And like, so just the complete lack of understanding of what things are, how they work, and the boneheaded insistence on things remaining the same when you're not even going to be here most likely in 30 years. And we are.
This is why going to school is important, folks, and eat your vitamins.
The other thing, too, when it comes to school is lifelong learning is important. School is not the only place where you can get an education or even where you should get an education. If you're an adult, and you're going to be talking about these issues, you need to be actually learning about them on a deeper level and not just peddling misinformation. Because ultimately, yes, you can get a 4-year education, but that shouldn't be the end of your education. And that's kind of what we're seeing here is this. They use a lot of coded wording to, do what they do. And that is what it is. But here at Wicked Grumpy Queer, we are intentionally going to call out the people who are doing the most damage and raise up the people who aren't. Oh, and there's one more thing I wanted to add. One of the 3 speakers at the city council meeting that spoke in favor of Valley's Edge was Bill Broward, who is the developer of Valley's Edge. So just putting that out there for anyone who didn't know that.
Interesting.
All right. So that brings us to the end of our podcast. I hope that you found it informative and enjoyable. Go ahead and subscribe, rate, like, whatever the particular app you're using calls for to say, hey, I want more of this content. Did you have anything else to say?
See you next week.
All right. Thanks. Have a good evening or a good day. Bye-bye.